Hello, everybody. So we have Rashawn and Praja here from the Memories team, as well as Esther. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Esther, and my main background has been in education as a former assistant professor of creative writing and transitioned into tech, mainly in instructional design. So, yep. And I'm a caregiver for my mother, who is 81 years old,
Wow.
and she has vascular dementia and Alzheimer's. She is currently living in a nursing home in Jacksonville as of last October, but that's been, as you know, like a transitional process. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And 81, wow, that's an exciting age. In terms of the diagnosis and how long your family's been experiencing that, do you mind walking us through when she was diagnosed and perhaps the progression from the beginning, even leading up to the diagnosis, and then to the care facility and where you're at now?
Sure. She was diagnosed roughly in 2015, 16. I always forget exactly when, just because we had symptoms preceding that. But we had official diagnosis from Emory when my husband and I were living there, and saw different symptoms when my parents were living independently in Lake City, Florida, in their home of 25 plus years. We helped them move to Atlanta to be closer to us, but also they are immigrants and English is not their first language. So Atlanta has a really vibrant Korean American community and resources. So it took some convincing, but they agreed to move there, and we helped them downsize to a condo, and they lived there for about 2 years. My husband, myself, and my dad, and then eventually we had a part-time caregiver, and my sister from long distance. She lived a couple hours or 6 hours away, but I think as a team we were kind of caregiving for our mom. So yeah. That was 2 years. After that, my mom, we helped her move into essentially an assisted living. They call them personal care homes, at least in Georgia. So what was special about this one was that it was all Korean. It was Korean owned, Korean residents, Korean food, and all of those components were so essential at that time. And she was also provided transportation to and from a Korean senior center, so she could still access activities and community and stuff. She was there, roughly year and a half.
Okay.
And her level of care, they couldn't continue to provide the level of care she needed. So we realized, we needed something more. And at that point, we knew this was kind of coming. We thought we were getting a little ahead, but my husband and I and my dad had moved back down to Florida, and then we helped my mom move to this nursing home in October.
What a journey. Wow.
It's a great, when your Google Photos, it says, oh, this happened 3 years ago, or 4
Yeah.
years ago. My husband and I always just laugh. We're like, oh yeah, we were helping our parents do that and this and that. And we can't believe how many moves and transitions, staying adaptable these last 4 years, how much that's entailed. But yeah.
No, adaptability and resilience is definitely traits that I think caregivers completely embody and is absolutely essential in situations like this. In terms of that original caregiving cohort with your husband and your father, and then bringing in a caregiver after, sort of how did that feel, having that task management support? How critical was that in the beginning compared to other folks perhaps who are coming into this looking for resources or ways to get started?
Oh, it's crucial, very crucial. I tried to reach out to local networks, various support groups. Emory has an established dementia clinic. So my mom was thankfully part of that, and there's a network there of classes, resources, community. In terms of tools, I actually maybe it's a workaround in a way, but I used to work for a tech company called Basecamp, and I ended up using Basecamp as one of the main task management tools, and we still use it. I know that's not what it's originally for, but it's project management. So we use that tool. I'm trying to think of other tools, but those were probably the main ones. And we also utilize a medication dispenser in terms of, I'm just trying to think offhand, like technology wise, and a stove and an oven. What do you call it? When it would monitor, help my mom alert if she walked away, and it would automatically turn off and stuff like that.
Okay.
We try to get creative and utilize as many tools as we can to help her stay independent as long as we felt it was safe.
Mm-hmm.
So that was probably about 2 years.
Okay. Okay. And then during that experience and while living at home versus as the disease progressed, how easy was it to tell when your mother was having a really good day or having a tough experience and being able to provide that support? How was that experience?
It was pretty challenging. And I should clarify, when my parents moved to Atlanta, we helped them downsize to that condo, but my husband and I lived about 40 minutes away.
Okay.
So we weren't in the same household. I might have misrepresented that. But we were, certainly checking in regularly and helping them and I had taken over their financials and stuff like that, and medication and medical appointments. But yeah, to go back to your question, it's extremely challenging. I think finding that initial foothold with finding support, professionals I could trust, but also fellow caregivers. Initially, it was extremely hard because what I found was caregivers, as you know, are like they can be stretched so thin. And I would attend these support groups, and it happened multiple times where they were canceled or I was the only person because people just didn't have the bandwidth. And so, yeah, but once I started to meet people and understand where to connect, it just was a lifeline. And I just, vowed, like, the more that I learned, that I would find ways to try to help other caregivers who are maybe not in the same place with their journey.
I think it's really interesting that you brought that up, and Praja will definitely touch on this later during our conversation, but the support group area is something that we're actually really interested in, because what we've seen on Instagram, for example, is there's numerous really great personalities, caregiving organizations, and dementia organizations that are producing really great content and are trying to support other folks. However, if you look at Facebook or other traditional methods of gathering people for support, sometimes the sort of cohesiveness and the positive experience isn't really expressed. So I think us trying to understand a really good way to almost onboard an individual into caregiving so that they know what's available to them, what may work for them in terms of communication strategy, what resources are available, and people that they could learn from is something that's important from the organization. Do you feel for you over the years of becoming a caregiver, this has become a lot easier to navigate as you've had more experience and amassed more caregiving time?
It's become a little bit, it's definitely become easier because I just feel like just educating myself and learning from more experienced caregivers, I have a better sense of, the road ahead, and also better management of self-care too. I think that's one of the most bewildering things is like how to maintain self-care while also figuring out how to navigate those boundaries of caring for another person who's an adult. So, I completely agree with you. I actually had, when I was training as a UX designer, one of the apps I developed was a prototype for a caregiver support app because it just was very relevant, and I could see some of the challenges of that. So it's something really dear to me, and I think there's a great need. And you brought up a really great point about how like newer caregivers could be onboarded and make that process easier and less daunting. But I also I also found it so amazing when I would meet more experienced caregivers. They are 99% of the time so wanting, willing, and in spite of how taxed they are so gracious and generous to want to share their knowledge. So I just thought, and I feel like when I've had the opportunity to start doing that now, it just gives a sense of, I think, some purpose too. So I think it's pretty cool to see how meaningful that can be no matter where you are in terms of experience.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm going to hop on a soapbox real quick, but that's something that you brought up that I absolutely love. And I think human capital in the form of intelligence is one of our best assets. And I think as people amass that, it's really a beautiful thing where more knowledge really opens up the door for more sharing. and people who have been industry leaders in any industry, for example, who, whether that's caregiving, tech, or finance, for example, who have learned from this. They want to share because they've been in a similar situation and just have wanted, if they were in that position again, they would love this knowledge. So I think it's really nice that you're sharing that. And that's also something that we would love to be able to do, is connect with caregivers and give them that opportunity, I would say, to support, because it's a daunting journey, becoming a caregiver, for sure. What I'd love to learn a bit more about as well is that transition to facility-based care. Right now you're in Jacksonville, and sort of making that move to there and sort of picking that facility. What was the thought process there? And then as your mother is living in this facility now, what is that relationship like?
Sure. Before this move, I had mentioned she was in that personal care home with all Korean. So taking her out of that was really, really difficult choice. And I know it's difficult no matter what, but I think we really weighed like, oh God, it's her quality of life. What will she gain and what will she lose leaving this facility? I actually shadowed her, or went with her to the senior activity center, because it was such a source of joy and engagement. But a few months or shortly before we decided to help her move, I went with her, and her level of engagement had changed a lot, and her health was not good at that time. So we made a difficult choice, my sister and I. We decided like she does need a higher level of care. If we can help her move closer to us, we can visit her more often. But the major downside is she would be moving into a place where likely no one else speaks her first language. And that was a little bit heartbreaking to kind of think about. So, but yeah, we did find, luckily, a nursing home that is wonderful on almost every level. The people there they know her, they really adore her, they really watch out for her. And we got very lucky with finding a place, because I'm sure you hear that a lot. It's like a lot of these facilities just don't have space. But we got lucky on both counts, just finding a good quality one, and one that had a space. And we helped her move, I think, in October.
Okay.
And at that time, her health was so bad that hospice. We had requested hospice part-time for that transition in Georgia, and the social worker kind of gave me a heads up and warning and said, your mom's health is pretty bad. I really would recommend you mapping out the ERs on your drive. Like, he was just like, I just don't know if he's like, I'll just be very upfront. Like, I don't know if your mom's going to handle this. I mean, she might not do well at all. So we were just kind of prepared, but she did really well. I mean, considering, and her health rebounded quite a bit. Can speculate about why that is, but yeah. So she moved in October. No one there speaks her first language. She's very resilient. She does know a little bit of English, and she has made some meaningful connections there. So, and I've tried to make a really big effort to get to know as many people there as possible. And I think that was critical. And I know that was, I feel like I'm in a privileged position to be able to even have the time to do that. So, but yeah, I think it's made a difference in her care for sure. And our family's level of feeling confident that she's getting good care.
Okay. No, that's a fantastic story, because that's such a hard transition to make, I think, in a decision as a family to make. But it's really amazing to hear that her health has rebounded and that she has been able to inform those connections. It's really interesting, because stories that you hear from different caregivers speak a lot about sort of periods where there's a plateau and then a rapid decline, for example, and understanding what those factors are leading up to that. Some speculation goes around social engagement and support, and whereas isolation, apathy, and depression are huge secondary factors and symptoms experienced with dementia and Alzheimer's, which does perhaps lead into these symptoms. However, that renewal of health almost and a rebound effect, and the factors that go into that, whether that's comfortability, whether that's new stimulation in an environment, assessing that is something that's definitely of interest. But I'm glad to hear that was able to happen for you.
Definitely. We were glad too.
Mhm.
And, I think, I'm sure you've already interviewed people where language
Mhm.
is a factor in the person's care. And it certainly has been for our family. Good. I mean, challenging and surprising too, because it's challenged my own assumptions.
Mhm.
Things that I thought were going to be a major obstacle or negatively impact my mom sometimes totally didn't at all. So,
Right.
so yeah, it keeps you on your toes for sure.
Okay. And then in terms of, I would say, caregiving concerns or lessons that you've had, I would say perhaps during the initial diagnostic period, understanding the disease, maybe some of the things that you're worried about versus having experienced through these past couple of years of being a caregiver and watching your mother's journey, what lessons have you learned?
I actually kind of just touched upon one of the biggest ones for me. There's actually this woman who is a great environmentalist and sailor, and she has this great quote. And I wish I remember exactly how she said it, but I think about it often because I feel like it applies in so many ways. She talks about how our expectations are can really get in the way, and essentially. And I think about that a lot with caregiving, especially because, like I mentioned a moment ago, like especially at the beginning when I knew even less, and I would think once I grasped some kind of knowledge or expectation, and I thought, oh, this is the way it's going to be, this is the right thing, or this is the better thing for my mom, I know best, and forgetting like that her condition is fluctuating and it's dynamic, and I have to stay adaptable and fluid and really listen. And it's really asked me to pay attention in a way that is maybe new or deeper for me. When someone is chronically ill, it's like you just want some kind of clarity, especially at the beginning. Like I just wanted some clarity. And then when you get a little bit, it's hard to, or at least it was for me, it's hard to not just grasp onto that as an absolute truth, a fixed truth. So I think that's one of the biggest lessons. It's like, today my mom loved painting. And, I think my tendency is like, oh, therefore I should get her all these things. She's going to always love these things. And it's like, no, not necessarily tomorrow or literally tomorrow or now, now with her condition, it's like literally tomorrow or next week, we may never paint again. And, or sometimes I thought for a few months, I thought she'd never return to reading. I like, that's it. I think she's done with reading. Like, and then all of a sudden one day she's like, oh, I want to read that book. I'm like, oh, so it's just an incredible, humbling, condition where it's like, wow, okay, I gotta, just pay attention, not take things for granted, and just stay really fluid with her. So yeah,
That's fantastic advice. And I think anybody who's listening and is looking for sort of something to hold on to and to really, when it comes to caregiving, that's great to hear. I'm going to transition this over to Praja. Feel free to go ahead. Praja, for everyone listening, does work on our social team and has been doing a fantastic job of leading our efforts in terms of understanding what tools are needed for caregivers, as well as how we can support them through social media. So I'll pass it on.
Awesome. Hi, Praja.
So thank you for sharing. That was super insightful. And it's so different just seeing someone and seeing your emotion and your realizations just when you're speaking. It's like you can tell that it's so real. Like it's not just some story that I'm reading from a book. But anyways, you were mentioning how you said that it was a little bit hard in the beginning to find that support. But then you were able to find that. And I was just wondering if you could speak more about that transition of how you were able to find it, what you use, what resources, because I think that's just something that we are struggling with because we want to be able to help all caregivers in all stages. But a lot of the people that we've talked to are very much in the late stage, or the people that they are caring for are very much in the late stage. They're able to provide such amazing insight, but we were missing a lot of information and clarity on just early stage support, technology, or any advice really. So I was wondering if you can just expand upon your early stage experiences.
Sure. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for making the space to just even talk about this. That's like it's a rare opportunity. So I think it's super important. Early on, my background is in academia. So like any kind of online research is totally my comfort zone. So, of course, jumping online and finding like, okay, who are the vetted, sources about Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, and we've, learning about Emory being in our backyard. I was like, oh my gosh, we're so lucky. And I've definitely since talked to friends and some strangers who've reached out who are in a place that geographically may not have those kind of resources and how they're navigating. It's been really interesting to see how they navigate. For instance, I remember talking to this one caregiver who lives in San Diego, and she and her sister were sharing caregiving, and her father was, I think, in later stages, and they were managing caregiving, but she had to work full time, and they had a part-time caregiver that who lives in Mexico. So she would drive over the border every week to pick up this caregiver.
Wow.
And it, frankly, was like the caregiver they could afford in their finances. And it's just incredible, like how they were managing. But yeah, early in those stages, just finding a lot of those vetted sources like alz.org and so forth. And starting from there and realizing like, okay, they have forums, they have support groups. My first impulse was like, I really want to meet people who are going through this stuff. Like I just want to, and like I mentioned before, it was a little bit challenging because a lot of people just aren't able, either because they don't have the bandwidth as a caregiver or because they don't have someone to take care of the caregiving if they go to a support group for an hour. I know that's a challenge too. And I've seen some support groups offer that resource, which I know that's an added kind of challenge. So yeah, I've been to a few support groups and reached out online. And then through Emory, they have different courses. They're usually pretty short. I want to say a day or two, but they're in person. And it was hard to make the time, but I finally was like, I need to do this. And it was probably one of the most pivotal, memorable experiences in terms of being in a room with, I think it was just like 10, 12 other caregivers, and their situations were all different, different stages. But I learned so much. It was one of the most profound, but also just in a short period of time, like just concrete learning takeaways, and also just kind of even more holistic, profound kind of learnings just about like what we may expect on the road ahead with my mom. I think, and then from there, I tried to be more mindful about feeling comfortable to talk about it with my friends, because it's one of those things. It's like, oh, this is such a bummer. Who wants to hear about this? But I really, really wanted to not do that for my own kind of mental health, but also because chronic illness shouldn't be a shameful thing. And I believe that intellectually. And I thought, if I believe that, I need to really walk that walk and share that uncomfortable stuff. And by and large, I was pleasantly surprised at friends. Of course, your friends, it's obvious, but it's like at first I was a little bit, unsure, but friends were so overwhelmingly supportive. And then, of course, gradually I found out about more and more friends who have been through this or are going through this similar journey. And then friends who have, loved ones who have early onset as well. So yeah, just learning about that. Also, there have been some resources, like surprising ones through YouTube and Instagram. There's a gentleman, oh my gosh, you probably already know about it. His mom had Lewy body, and he started a YouTube series just simply, usually in his car with his mom and their drives, and it just understandably like took off because people, it really resonated. And so they're heartbreaking, and you watch them and you're weeping, but it was this point of connection. It's like, oh my gosh, here's someone going through something related. Also, his mother's, later stages and a different condition, and seeing what they're grappling with, it just takes away some of that mystery a little bit. So yeah, I hope that answered your question with different resources. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think YouTube is not something we really explored. And I think just this conversation that we had with you is definitely opening up that as a resource that we're definitely going to investigate. You spoke about Instagram. I was wondering if you can just kind of provide some insight onto that. That is something that we're trying to use as one, a platform for caregivers similar to you, as well as a platform where we can kind of give a little bit of insight on whether it's self-care or just kind of a what to expect thing. So if you have any insight on what accounts you do follow or what content you appreciate, anything like that would be super helpful for us and our endeavors with caregivers.
Definitely. I'm so bad at remembering like different people's usernames or profiles, but if I can follow up with the actual names, I'd be
Yeah,
happy to
sure.
send those to you. Yeah, I know they're of course the podcast and but different, just strangers. I mean, Instagram. One thing I like about that platform, because I'm a skeptical social media user, and but Instagram, I uh, consciously wanted to start an account solely devoted to our family's journey. Not only because, like I said, to take away that element of shame um, when a family is encountering chronic illness, but also because of our family, like being, you know, family of color. I honestly just didn't see those stories reflected, at least in the people that I was following at that time, or in my day to day life. I was kind of yearning to see. I was like, surely there are other, you know, Asian American families who are, you know, and I was just like, where are those stories? I was really yearning to see those stories. And I thought, gosh, if anybody else is feeling that way, I'm going to start sharing our family story. Um, Maybe that'll, I don't know, maybe that'll help someone. And it's been so amazing because the first and foremost reason for starting that really was so my family, in particular my sister and myself, we would have this documented legacy, um, primarily focused on some of the moments of levity and connection with our mom. There's already, you know, of course, there's a lot of challenging and heartbreaking things about what's going on with our mom's condition, but I really wanted to have this one central place about um, those really meaningful moments, whether it's like super ordinary or what have you. And I look at those a lot, and then um, consequentially and surprisingly, like from that, I feel like I've made connections with strangers over Instagram. Like I follow different strangers' stories about their loved ones, and they're doing that for me. And it sounds really obvious, but I think for in the world of caregiving, when it can feel so isolating as it is, at least in your mind, um, it's so meaningful. It's like when you're following someone's story about their mom, you know, their relationship with their mom, and some of the people I've been following, you know, their loved one has since passed, and then what their life looks like afterwards. It's a really I don't know. It's a little bit of a lifeline, to be honest. And we share tips just organically. Like things will be mentioned. Maybe like for instance, our family, we ended up getting I forget what it's called, the stuffed animal, the cat toy for our mom.
Hmm.
And so many people asked about it. They were just like, "Where'd you get that? How does that work?" Blah blah blah. And I remember posting about this another product where it's accessible painting where with water. Yeah, sorry if you already know about this, but I didn't know about this. You just use a paintbrush, but you add water, and this painting appears, and then after an hour, it dries back to white. My mom was so engaged with that, and people asked, like, "Where did you find that? Oh, how does that work?" And it was really cool. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so." It's just this organic way of like sharing knowledge and resources, and I've definitely felt that way too, reaching out to people. So, yeah, I can see a lot of opportunity over Instagram and YouTube for fostering that.
That's amazing. That's amazing that you're also doing it yourself and not just looking at other people's stories, that you're being essentially like a role model or a sense of support for so many other people, which is such a great little thing that you're doing. And we definitely appreciate that because we're learning so much from you. Another question I had was more related to technology. You did mention that you were using something that I started with the B, I don't remember, and you said you also work there. Did you want to kind of give us a little brief outline of what that is and what it did for you and if it was helpful?
Sure. It's a project management tool called Basecamp. I think a lot of my sense from at least the last few years working in tech is I feel like some of the most popular tools for project management probably like Slack is probably one of the most popular, or Asana. Basecamp is probably my guess is probably the most popular five. Their target, I guess, clientele is mainly small to mid-level businesses, mid-sized businesses, and a lot of academia as well too, and students and teachers, higher ed, but a lot of small to mid-size. But yeah, it's a project management tool created by a designer and a software engineer. The software engineer, they also created a coding language called Ruby on Rails. Mm-hmm. And and they've written a few books about remote working. They're a real big proponent, for better or for worse. They're like really opinionated, and they talk about that. So I had the great opportunity to intern there, and I was like getting involved in software engineering, QA development. I helped them develop a podcast episode about a Black-owned business here in Atlanta, and super, super cool company, roughly about 50 people. But yeah, they, of course, working there, you have free access to that software and for really indefinitely for the rest of your life. It's very user-friendly for someone who's maybe not as tech savvy, and consciously so. And so I started using it because it was, I had access to it, and we still continue to use it. I actually wrote a blog post about being a maybe skeptical user of Basecamp at first, and really embracing it and showing like how we use it for caregiving, in particular with tasks. And I manage my parents' finances on it. And I think what else, but yeah, with my sister being super busy and we live in different towns, it was one way for all of us, to stay abreast of stuff. So yeah, and so we still use that. That's what we use.
Amazing. And does your loved one use any kind of technology to help them, just with daily lives?
I would say at this point, no. I think off the top of my head, my mom used to use a computer for word processing. Mm-hmm. She used to write kind of like her own journal, and then she still has a flip phone. But as of late, it's definitely becoming more and more challenging for her to use, and we pre-program numbers. And we used to have that landline when they had the condo, where you pre-program and it's just one number. We had that for a while, and she used that along with a cell phone at that time. But yeah, but I can't think of any other technology.
Okay, I think I'll hop in here, and to be mindful of time, I think I have one final question for you. In terms of us being a technology platform, and what we would love to do is help caregivers and their care receivers and their loved ones at different stages of dementia, Alzheimer's, and other cognitive impairments. Right now, with your mother living in the facility, I'm wondering what sort of information would be helpful for you to learn from her, based on where she is, to be able to have that connectivity to her, whether that's easier ways for her, for example, to be able to dial and connect with you, whether that's information sharing on your end to hers, or information you'd like to learn about her day-to-day. What would be valuable for you?
Definitely the day-to-day. The nursing home that she's in, like I said, overall it's been wonderful. But there have been some bumps in the road or miscommunications or understandings, and we had one recently where, and this is probably not uncommon too, with my mom's nursing home, they're a little bit less staffed on the weekends, and some of the regular administrators are not there necessarily, usually on the Monday or on the weekends. So getting clarity or certain information about her health on the weekends. A couple weeks ago I kind of ran into a really big brick wall, and it was very frustrating. I'm trying to remember. She recently had hip surgery, and my sister's an ER nurse. So I just say that because when my mom was actually taken by ambulance to a hospital for hip surgery, it was a rare opportunity for my sister and I to actually be in the same room with her during this whole lockdown. And then after 3 days, my mom had to be moved back into the nursing home. And of course, we didn't have that physical access to her. And my sister in particular, because of her experience as an ER nurse, she was just like, oh God, I see it all the time. People with dementia, they're so neglected. And, so we both were kind of on heightened alert, like, oh, is our mom going to be neglected? Is she going to get therapy she needs? Is she going to get up? And so we were really worried about that. And so that first weekend, I was trying to get clarity about, like, had my mom been up today? Did somebody? And there was such a communication breakdown that following Monday, I wrote a long email to the director and another staff member I'm pretty close with, just saying, hey, this is what happened. This is very frustrating. I'm sure this is not what you want to have, the experience, and let's figure out what happened here. And we've since had a great talk and talked about, they basically reapproached all the nursing staff and gave clarity about where to find physical therapy notes. There was such confusion all across the board. So, but that's one big example, but yeah, finding out the day-to-day, but also taking off that, I don't want to say burden, but that extra layer of responsibility for CNAs and nurses, because I also get it. It's like they are already stretched thin and frankly often usually underpaid in a lot of cases. So, and I know a lot of those folks who take care of my mom, and they're wonderful, good people. So I'm just thinking, just the reality of having to find and look that up, add it to everything else they're doing, just trying to be realistic. So if there's just a way, I can see technology being really helpful. That's one of the major ways. It's like, how can just information that's already in a system, but a human being doesn't have to go looking for it all the time, but the family has access and has the right to see that. How can I just simply see that information and not have to, burden someone else?
No, that's super helpful. And thank you for sharing that story. And I think that's a very real concern as well, especially with any hip problems with elderly, especially those living with impairment, mobility, and getting most of any ramifications that come through that is really related to a lack of being able to get back to their set point and whatever that is, and the processes that are slowed down because of immobility. So kudos to your family, really, both yourself and your sister, for ensuring and pushing for the right quality of care for your mother. But I can understand the stress in that situation. So thank you for that. And transparency is something, and we hope to build into the application and get more information from the home to provide some aid to caregivers like yourself. But I think that's everything that we wanted to discuss today. I think you provided a full purview of information in regards to onboarding in the caregiving experience, moving through it, moving to different facilities, understanding where to get resources, as well as what's been helpful for you and what hasn't. So I hope everybody who's listening has had the opportunity to digest this information. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rashawn and Praja. Appreciate it.